So, welcome back to our 48 hours reading challenge and marathon reading. So, yeah, we took a short break. So apologies for the interruption of connection. So, yeah, the book we'll be reading next is this: How to Win Friends and Influence People. I've also started reading it, but then I'm going to, you know, for the purpose of people who are going to be following, I'm going to start from um chapter 1. I'm going to start all over from chapter 1 again. So now let's continue reading. If you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. On May 7, 1931, the most sensational manhunt New York City had ever known had come to its climax. After weeks of search, Two-Gun Crowley, the killer, the gunman who didn't smoke or drink, was at bay, trapped in his sweetheart's apartment on West End Avenue. 150 policemen and detectives laid siege to his top floor hideaway. Okay, I'm coming. Yes, here is this. I am not with my highlighter, so I'm going to be using a pencil to highlight the parts of the book I actually like because I actually love the book. Yeah, I've read it once before and I really microphone for better audio quality. I hope you can hear me, please. Let me have the feedback. Moving on. 150 policemen and detectives laid siege to his top floor hideaway. They chopped holes in the roof. They tried to smoke out Crowley's, the cop killer, with tear gas. Then they mounted their machine guns on surrounding buildings. And for more than an hour, one of New York's fine residential areas vibrated with the crack of pistol fire and the rat-tat-tat of machine guns. Crowley, crouching behind an overstuffed chair, fired incessantly at the police. 10,000 excited people watched the battle. Nothing like it had ever been seen before on the sidewalks of New York. When Crowley was captured, Police Commissioner E.P. Mulroney declared that the two-gun desperado was one of the most dangerous criminals ever encountered in the history of New York. "He will kill," said the commissioner, "at the drop of a feather." But how did two-gun Crowley regard himself? We know because while the police were firing into his apartment, he wrote. He wrote a letter addressed to whom it may concern, and as he wrote, the blood flowing from his wounds left a crimson trail on the paper. In this letter, Crowley said, "Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm." A short time before this, Crowley had been having a necking party with his crack a save or be quick on the trigger finger. Most of them attempt by a form of reasoning, fallacious or logical, to justify their antisocial acts even to themselves. Consequently, stoutly maintaining that they should never have been imprisoned at all. If Capone, Two-Gun Crowley, Dodge, and the desperate men and women behind prison walls don't blame themselves for anything, what about the people with whom you and I come in contact? Okay, excuse me. Sorry, I didn't say the topic of this chapter. How to get the most out of this book. Okay, the topic is if you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. So, moving on. John Wanamaker, founder of the American stores that bear his name, once confessed, "I learned 30 years ago that it is foolish to scold. I have enough trouble overcoming my own limitations without fretting over the fact that God has not seen fit to distribute heavenly." Wanamaker learned this lesson early, but I personally had to blunder through this old word for a third of a century before it even began to dawn upon me that 99 times out of 100, people don't criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong it may be. Criticism is futile because it puts a person on the defensive and usually makes him strive to justify himself. Criticism is dangerous because it wounds a person's precious pride, hurts its sense of importance, and arouses resentment. B.F. Skinner, the world famous psychologist, proved through his experiment that an animal rewarded for good behavior will learn much more rapidly and retain what it learns far more effectively than an animal punished for bad behavior. Later studies have shown that the same applies to humans. By criticizing, we do not make lasting changes and often incur resentment. As Selly, another great psychologist, said, as much as we test for approval, we dread condemnation. The resentment that criticism engenders can demoralize employees, family members, and friends, and still not correct the situation that has been condemned. George B. Johnston of Enid, Oklahoma, is the safety coordinator for an engineering company. One of his responsibilities is to see that employees wear their hard hats whenever they are on the job in the field. He reported that whenever he came across workers who were not wearing hard hats, he would tell them with a lot of authority of the regulation and that they must comply. As a result, he would get sullen acceptance, and often after he left, the workers would remove the hat. He decided to try a different approach. The next time he found some of the workers not wearing their hat, he asked if the hats were uncomfortable or did not fit properly. Then he reminded the men in a pleasant tone of voice that the hat was designed to protect them from injury and suggested that it always be worn on the job. The result was increased compliance with the regulation with no resentment or emotional upsets. You will find examples of the futility of criticism bristling on a thousand pages of history. Take, for example, the famous quarrel between Theodore Roosevelt and President Taft, a quarrel that split the Republican Party, put Woodrow Wilson in the White House, and wrote bold, luminous lines across the First World War and altered the flow of history. Let's review the facts quickly. When Theodore Roosevelt stepped out of the White House in 1908, he supported Taft, who was elected president. Then Theodore Roosevelt went off to Africa to shoot lions. When he returned, he exploded. He denounced Taft for his conservatism, tried to secure the nomination for a third term himself, formed the Bull Moose Party, and all but demolished the GOP in the election that followed. William Howard Taft and the Republican Party carried only two states, Vermont and Utah, the most disastrous defeat the party had ever known. Theodore Roosevelt blamed Taft, but did President Taft blame himself? Of course not. With tears in his eyes, Taft said, I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have done. Who was to blame, Roosevelt or Taft? Frankly, I don't know and I don't care. The point I am trying to make is that all of Roosevelt's criticism didn't persuade Taft that he was wrong. It merely made Taft strive to justify himself and to reiterate with tears in his eyes, I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have done. Or take the Teapot Done oil scandal. It kept the newspaper ringing with indignation in the early 1920s. It rocked the nation. Within the memory of living men, nothing like it had ever happened before in American public life. Here are the bare facts of the scandal. About Before, Secretary of the Interior in Aden's cabinet, was entrusted with the leasing of government oil reserves at Elk Hill and Teapot Dune, oil reserves that had been set aside for the future use of the Navy. Did Secretary 4 permit competitive bidding? No. He handed the fat, juicy contract outright to his friend Edward L. Doheny. And what did Doheny do? He gave Secretary 4 what he was pleased to call a loan of $100,000. Then, in a high-handed manner, Secretary 4 ordered the United States Marines into the district to drive off competitors whose adjacent wells were sapping oil out of the Elk Hill reserves. These competitors, driven off their ground at the end of guns and bayonets, rushed into court and blew the lid off the Teapot Dune scandal. A stench arose so vile it ruined the Harding administrations, now seated an entire nation, threatened to wreck the Republican Party and put Alba behind prison bars. Paul was condemned viciously, condemned as few men in public life have ever been. Did he repent? No, never. Years later, Herbert Hoover intimated in a public speech that President Adams' death had been due to mental anxiety and worry because a friend had betrayed him. When Mrs. Ford heard that, she sprang from her chair, she wept, she shook her fist at fate and screamed, "What? Hadn't betrayed by four? No! My husband never betrayed anyone. This old house full of gold would not tempt my husband to do wrong. He is the one who has been betrayed and led to the slaughter and crucified." There you are, human nature in action. Wrongdoers blaming everybody but themselves. We are all like that. So when you and I are tempted to criticize someone tomorrow, let's remember Capone, True Gun Crawling, and Albert Fall. Let's realize that criticisms are like homing pigeons. They always return home. Let's realize that the person we are going to correct and condemn will probably justify himself or herself and condemn us in return, or like the gentle Taft will say, "I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have." On the morning of April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln lay dying in a hall bedroom of a cheap lodging directly across the street from Ford's Theater, where John Wilkes Booth had shot him. Lincoln's body lay stretched diagonally across a sagging bed that was too short for him. A cheap reproduction of Rosa Bonheur's famous painting, The Horse Fair, hung above the bed, and a dismal gas jet flickered yellow light. As Lincoln lay dying, Secretary of War Stanton said, "There lies the most perfect ruler of men that the world has ever seen." What was the secret of Lincoln's success in dealing with people? I studied the life of Abraham Lincoln for 10 years and devoted all of 3 years to writing and rewriting a book entitled Lincoln the Unknown. I believe I have made as detailed and exhaustive study of Lincoln's personality and home life as it is possible for any being to make. I made a special study of Lincoln's method of dealing with people. Did he indulge in criticism? Oh, yes. As a young man in the Pigeon Creek Valley of Indiana, he not only criticized, but he also wrote letters and poems ridiculing people and dropped these letters on the country roads where they were sure to be found. One of these letters aroused resentment and burned for a lifetime. Mm. Even after Lincoln had become a practicing lawyer in Springfield, Illinois, he attacked his opponents openly in letters published in the newspapers. But he did this just once too often. In the autumn of 1842, he ridiculed a vain, pugnacious politician by the name of James Shields. Lincoln lampooned him through an anonymous letter published in the Springfield Journal. The town roared with laughter. Shields, sensitive and proud, boiled with indignation. He found out who wrote the letter, leaped on his horse, started after Lincoln, and challenged him to fight a duel. Lincoln didn't want to fight. He was opposed to dueling, but he couldn't get out of it and save his honor.